Fire, 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 fire. Kill it. Rasta music. Listen, listen, listen. Yeah. SINY. Yeah, man. Yes, sir. To the universe. Yeah, listen. Fire, fire, fire.
Hey, welcome back. Live that SINY. Ja Dredge, your host, and we back with another banger here. Let me introduce our guest today, Miss Edna Greenwich, aka the Opera Lady. There's something going on with my mic, please excuse it, but it's such a pleasure to have you back in the house, and we have such a wonderful show prepared for them today.
Well, it's wonderful to be back. Thank you for inviting me. And yes, we do have an interesting show today. It's informative. We hope you find it informative and entertaining and educational as well, and a lot of fun. We want to celebrate our communities and celebrate the Black experience.
Right, and the excellence of it,
the magnificence of it, and that it still stands and thrives today with many partners.
Right.
So I know you want to talk about the holiday that we just had.
I sure do, but I also want to talk about give us just like an update to what's been going on with you since the last time you've been on the show, because you've been very busy.
Well, yes, I produced a show for Martin Luther King's birthday.
Here?
It was at St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, and it was the Elizabeth Jennings Graham story.
Yes.
And we're going to do it again, but Elizabeth Jennings Graham, 100 years before Rosa Parks.
Right, right.
100 years before Rosa Parks, Elizabeth Jennings Graham was thrown off a rail car in Manhattan.
Wow.
And she was injured, and she sued. She sued the rail. She sued the Third Avenue Rail. And she won. But the interesting thing is that she and her family were fighters. They were educators. And this was in 1864. 1864. And they hired this young lawyer. He was 24 years old, and he wanted the case. He wanted this case because prior to that time, he was known as somewhat of a playboy, and he was serious about law. And Chester Arthur won that case in a Brooklyn court, and he became the 21st president of the United States. So it's a fascinating story, and we look at all the parts of it. And very inspiring and very uplifting, because she continued to work, and her family continued to be educators, be advocators and motivators. And you have to understand what New York City was like during that time. There were all these factions fighting against each other, and particularly against Black people. So it was with this backdrop that Elizabeth Jennings Graham stood tall, and won her case. And that case was the foundation of desegregating the transportation in New York City.
All right now. So we just we dropped another jewel on y'all. We need you to go out there and do your research and look into it and read the books and whatever,
Elizabeth Jennings Graham, and there's several books on her, but she was a fighter. And it was interesting that it was Chester Arthur, this young 24-year-old attorney who wanted to take her case. He wanted it, and
who happened to become
the 21st president of the United States.
Yes.
Yeah. So we did that story. We also did the story on Uncle Tom, the heroic story of Josiah Henson.
Right.
So that was, Josiah Henson was who Harriet Beecher Stowe based her book, Uncle Tom, on. So Uncle Tom was a hero in real life.
A real person.
He was a real person. He was heroic. He took a beating rather than have the betray some women who had, enslaved women who had escaped. He took his family to Canada to be free. He walked with his family because he had been promised freedom. He'd been promised many things by slave masters and they didn't deliver. So he took his freedom. And once he got to Canada, he started a school for black people, freed black people. And he came back to the States and freed more black people. So he was very heroic. And the thing that Uncle Tom's Cabin did was it gave a human face to slavery. It was a bestseller across the country, across the globe, and it gave fuel to the abolitionists that you are destroying a human being. And the Southerners decided to create their own version of Uncle Tom. And to this day, that version still permeates us.
Which is the buffoonish.
The buffoon,
Right.
the betrayal, the vindictive, the dreadful Salmon Legree mentality. That is the portrait that still stands with us today. And it's not true. When you look at the life of Josiah Henson, you have to stand tall and be proud of him and what he did. And that building, that school, is still very much in Canada, where he had an underground railroad before the Underground Railroad. He brought his people, he wanted freedom. And he had provided education for them in Canada. So we've done that story, and I've been asked to do that story again, and the story of Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, who was one of America's premier opera singers.
Right.
She made her New York City debut in 1853 at Metropolitan Hall, was down on Mercer and Prince, and then she went to Europe, where she sang a Royal Command performance for Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace. And unlike some other famous individuals that left the country, she returned. She came back to the States and she set up a salon in Philadelphia to teach other black artists what she had learned in the UK about music. It's interesting that she went to England so that she could learn, she could be taught by the same teacher that taught the Swedish Nightingale.
Well, you know what they say. If you don't cross to the other side of the street, you don't know what you're missing out.
She went to learn from that teacher because no teacher in the States would teach her. None of the reputable classical music teacher would teach her because she was black. And she was willing to pay twice the going rate. And yet they wouldn't teach her. So she wanted to learn from Jenny Lind's teacher.
And it was more of the discouragement, okay? By discouraging her, they thought they would, change.
You're right. Well, her manager stole her money and left her in England without any money. And she, being determined and knowing what she could do, she found Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was in the UK at the time, and she introduced her to Duchess of Sutherland, who was a close, intimate friend of Queen Victoria's. And Queen Victoria permitted her to be taught by her organist, her own personal organist, gave Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield lessons. And those lessons were important because today artists just float up and down the scales. They go from the soprano to the mid, they just float up and down the scales. She couldn't do that because she didn't have the training, but she had a powerful voice. She could sing soprano and she could sing down there in bass. And we know that by the way she was reviewed, how she was critiqued. We know that she had those deep voices, but she couldn't float up and down. So when I hear artists today moving up and down the scales, it's a very expensive training that gets them there. It's very expensive, but that's where the beauty is.
And the beauty of the story is the resiliency.
Oh yes, she persevered. I mean, you took all her money. But people in her position here in the United States didn't have any money anyway.
Right.
So she knew how to function without money. And she did. She was intelligent, she had been educated, and she knew that what she did mattered. And she knew she had talent. And she had raw talent. She had the most beautiful voice. But she also had the resilience, like many of our artists today, the classical musicians. Many of them have been discouraged in the beginnings of their career, in the middle of their career. And you sit down and you see people that may not have the voice that you have, who are getting all the roles. Or you see different things. But if you are determined to do what you need to do because you want to do it, you will persevere. Jessie Norman said that her teacher told her once to just stand up and sing.
Right.
Just stand up and sing. And so I look at artists today who are all singing, and I see some of the progress. I see some of them now all over Facebook singing in different countries, and it's about time. They stand on the shoulders of some awesome people. And Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield is one of them, and Sister Rita Jones, who was considered the Black Patty, was another one. She came up after Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, had slightly an easier time than she did.
Right.
And she sang that, she had a bigger career and she created some wealth for herself. And then the artists going down the line just kept on building on what these women had done. But they endured tremendous hardships for their craft.
Yeah, but you remember the old saying when they say, when there's a will, there's a way. You know what I'm saying? So you have to, you really have to will these things into existence.
You do, and you have to keep doing the work, and you have to keep getting up. So for Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, Sister Rita Jones, Marian Anderson.
Right.
When I do that story on Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, it's 100 years before Marian Anderson. And again, we have to look at some of the men. We're always talking about the women of opera, and sometimes we don't acknowledge the men.
Past Paul Robeson.
So you've got Paul Robeson, you've got Roland Hayes, but when Marian Anderson made her debut at the Met, Robert McFerrin Sr. made his 3 weeks later. And we rarely hear anything about Robert McFerrin Sr., but he was there on the pages of history as well. So it hasn't been easy for the men, the black men, either.
It hasn't.
It hasn't. And so when I look at the young men today who are singing, Kenneth Overton, Barry Robinson. I look at them and Kevin Thompson, and I look at Kevin J. Miller, who's accompanying Lawrence Bradley, one of our big singers. Lawrence Brownlee has got an amazing voice. And so for them to have traveled the world presenting their music. And I do.
And it's an honor to talk about them because they're alive. And
yes, they're here. And I look at Willard White. I remember Willard White and reading about him and how he was this great bass baritone and he was singing. And I remember him. And all of these artists who paved the way.
Yes.
And many of them reached back. Many of them reached back and taught the artists coming up. I know that the women certainly have, and I know that some of the men have. And
I just think it's easier for women to break through and to get that attention as in comparison to men of color. I mean,
yeah, and it's because of the roles.
right.
You know, it's easier to see a romantic scene between a black woman and a white man.
Right.
And so if it's going to be Othello, you put a white man, give him some paint. But of course, if it's Placido Domingo, you make allowances for that. Seriously, he's one of my favorites. So I think I remember seeing Othello, and I remember going to see it, and I thought, who wants to see another old man? Who wants to see this old man singing? And then we went, and I was sitting in the orchestra, and I thought, he can sing forever if he likes. So in a case like that where it's such a superstar, but I look at all the singers that have come through, all of the artists, and some of them, you know, Porgy and Bess. Some of our greatest black artists have sang in Porgy and Bess.
Right. I think the world is missing out on the culture, period, in these days, and the agenda is to focus on other stuff. You know what I'm saying?
On different genres?
Yeah. Right.
Well,
instead of the arts and the culture.
in the culture.
Right.
Well, what we as black people must understand and remember is that we are a part of that culture. From the very beginning, we have been a part of that culture. So I was very happy to see the documentary on Joseph Bologna, Chevalier de St. George, who was composing at the same time as Mozart. So happy to see that. And we just have to continue to peel back that onion of our history, because we are there. We're at every juncture, every point. We are there.
Right, and to top that is in the genes also, right?
And we can't stop that.
Right, it's in the genes and is not being utilized or, you know, used. Okay, we have these hidden talents and these hidden, you know, DNA strands, I'll say.
And when you unleash that talent, it just blows you away. It is unstoppable. It's unstoppable, and it is ongoing. But we have to nurture it. We have to support it. You can have talent, but if you don't have the training, you don't get. And in opera, it is expensive. This is why we have large opera foundations that support opera students. The Licia Albanese Puccini Foundation has helped many artists, and Licia was very simpatico to black artists.
Right.
She was one who was there supporting them. If you had talent, she would promote you. She would push you. And those awards that are given out by these foundations, there's Opera Index. Opera Index gave out $82,000 last year. $82,000 to some of the young people who had auditioned, who was in their competitions. That can help with a lot of training.
But there's a lot who do not know that these programs exist, and once again, like I was saying about the cultures, they've been taken away. You know, they don't have these outlets to go to. They don't have even opera in school. I don't believe you can get opera in public school, junior high or high school. You might be able to get it in college, you know what I'm saying? But I'm still, you know, slightly not even confident that you can get in college now, you know. Even the debate clubs and certain things like that, you know, they removed it out of the curriculum, and it's like seen out of sight, out of mind, basically.
Well, there's so many public schools that don't have music programs.
Right.
They don't have music programs at all. And so many schools don't have bands.
Right.
They may have bands in junior high, but when you get to the high school level, the bands seem to disappear. So music is extremely important because there's so much you learn from music. You learn the discipline, for one, and critical thinking. You learn how to put things together.
Right.
And
Harmonizing.
you learn harmonize and how to work together and how to flow. Music is very important. You know, there was a program, a documentary on America Unmasked, and it was about the pandemic and how arts survived during the pandemic. And I can tell you, there was never a time I thought there wouldn't be art in New York City, that the museums would be closed, that the opera houses, the cafes, everything would be shut down. I never envisioned that. In fact, I was always one of those relatively smug individuals that would go through Times Square and say how fabulous it was that Broadway was there, and that the costumers were working, and that the stagehands were working, and there was going to be a show in a few hours. And I always thought, this is living, this is life. And many times I would go and get a ticket. The last minute I'd go. If I didn't get it at the discount booth, I'd walk in and try to get a ticket, a reasonable ticket, to see a show, and just marvel that all of these people were working on Broadway. And I would just sit there, and if I wasn't feeling well when I walked in, I was feeling great when I left.
Right.
And it was all because of all of these people, all of this art. If I wanted to go catch a show, go over to Carnegie Hall, or even go at the Carlisle and go into the cafe and stand there and just look and listen to. I never thought there'd ever be a time they couldn't do that. Never. And as difficult as it was for me, how difficult was it for the artists?
Right. The artists.
Artists, the stage directors, that whole industry just shut down. So when we finally came back, and we had live performances, many directors, particularly in small opera companies, and paid artists a little extra. Because
I mean, they deserved it. And also, if you remember pandemic time, people turned their terrace into those buildings that you were saying, and they performed for their whole neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods would come out daily to see these performances and to hear.
yes,
Right.
yes, because it really was that important.
Right.
And you know, for the first time, many artists they were experiencing food scarcity. Many artists left New York City because they couldn't afford to live here, and they went back to small towns or wherever they came from. So many, I know that Opera Index gave special awards to people that that participated in their competition as a honorarium, because you're still in this business. But it was pretty depressing, and it showed how much the arts bring to our lives. And living in New York City, I think every child should be exposed to the arts. But I feel that way about every child in this country. Right. Let's get them into the music halls, get them into the opera, get them into the museums, get them.
But here, you know, if we want it everywhere, but here it just seems to be disappearing, and we want more of transparency with it, you know.
Well, I think that there's organizations like Opera America that reaches out, that encourages community engagement from their opera companies that are members, and they encourage support for young people, and we have to support our artists. But you know what, if we don't step up and support these opera singers more, they are going to have to go into another business. And many of them have already left. They've gone into teaching, you know, they've gone into other industries because they've found it difficult to make a living being an opera singer. And there are certain, now schools is teaching, they're teaching them that you're going to have to do something more than sing opera. You're going to have other skills that will support you until, you know, you're in the top 10 or top 20 or top 50 opera singers, until you become a Cecilia Bartoli or a Denise Graves, you know. Until you get to that stage, these are things that you have to be able to do. And one of the things I like that opera singers are doing is that many of them are singing spirituals, and they're singing other genres. Some of them are doing jazz, and I say you do what pays the bills.
Right.
And we should make sure that we pay them as best we can, that we support them by paying them as much as we can. Let's look at our budgets and stretch them as far as we can.
It's just mind-boggling how it's so expensive still, all of these many, many years later. Like, that's probably one of the only genres where, you know, the expense hasn't gone down so many years later.
Well, it probably can't go down, because the opera singer has to learn languages, they have to learn dialect, they have to learn to speak. Fabulous thing about Jessie Norman is she would not sing in a language she didn't speak. So you need to be able to understand what you're saying. Yeah. And so you have your voice teacher, you have that coach who's helping you get to some point in your voice and in your repertoire. Up until maybe now, artists had to actually go to different countries, the country where they are singing, with their origin. If you've got a German repertoire, then you went to Germany and you studied with a German teacher. If you were studying French, you had a French rep, you went to France. They actually went to these countries, immersed themselves in the culture, and got a teacher. And
right, I believe that's where the complication.
And that's where it's expensive. How many artists can afford to do that? Afford to maintain some living place here, and then you go over in some other country. And I had an opera singer who was lovely, and she would work for almost a month, and then she would go and study with Grace Bumbry for a week or two, and then she would come back and work, and then she'd go back and study. And she's been in Germany, I want to say, for the last 15, 16, 18 years. She got a job as a singer, an artist with a house. She's a house performer, so she does different performances. And she's been in Germany all of these years. She never came back to the United States because she could work there continuously.
Right. I mean, me personally, I would say in these modern times, we would probably have to change the narrative because now you can practically bring everything to you.
Yes,
Right.
virtual. You can do that. That Zoom, that virtual,
Right.
you can do that, yes.
So it
So it
should
makes
be
it a little easier, a little less expensive.
Right. And a little bit more, I'm going to say convenient, but it just,
A little more accessible.
right.
It makes it a little more accessible for artists. They still have to pay the teacher, but they at least don't have to travel and live there.
With the inconvenience
yes.
of that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I think that's working. I haven't talked to any of the artists recently about how that feels because I'm looking at them on Facebook, and Facebook, they're all in different countries. They're singing.
Still
they're,
with that same narrative.
yes,
Right.
because you have to go and perform. You cannot do a virtual performance if you're performing at the Paris Opera. You have to be
but
there.
if we can get them to change certain, things that's set in stone, then we can maybe get some of the costs down that goes along with becoming an opera performer.
Well, first of all, you go through university, you go through conservatory. Once you graduate, that's just the first step. It's just the first step to being an opera singer, an opera artist. You still have to go through master classes. You have to get the teachers. You have to get the agent. You have to get the coach. You have to get all of those things.
Right.
And unfortunately, it is expensive. And it's a little different. I remember listening to Martina Arroyo and Roberta Peters, and they talked about what it was like when they were coming into the business and how patrons helped them with gowns, with music.
Oh, they're much needed. Patrons are much needed.
So the patrons actually bought their gowns. There was somebody who came and bought their gowns for them and bought their music. There's pieces of music that cost $65, $75, $80. And artists have to buy it if that's what they're preparing. So they talk about how they entered the business. There are still donors that will support artists in that way.
It should just be a little bit more organized. I feel like all of these years later to where there's a specific funding group or, a specific place where patrons know to go to support these artists.
Well, there actually is. For people who want to support artists, most of them know where to go. In the Manhattan School of Music, there is a department called Joan's Closet. And this donor, Joan Aids, supplies clothes in various sizes that artists can go and take. And she even has a dressmaker to alter them for her. And I know with opera exposures, there's certain people that'll make a donation and they will say, I want this to go towards an outfit for an artist.
Right.
I want this to go towards music for an artist. So if an artist has to buy music, when I was asking well-established opera artists what would have been helpful to you when you were coming up, and they have said costumes and music.
Right, I'm saying it should be like some coalition or like just established all of these years later to where there's specific groups that set in place, you know what I'm saying, that these artists can go directly to, and not just one person, you know what I'm saying? We need numbers
Well,
all together and have the same
yeah,
goals.
thought. Well, there are a number of donors, and I'll tell you right now, opera would not exist today without those donors. There wouldn't be any opera companies or organizations without the generous support of donors. You can get foundation money, you can get grants, you can get all of those other things, but it is the consistent support of individual donors that keep this art form alive.
Okay.
That's what we rely on. We rely on those donors to continue loving what they do, loving what they see, loving what they hear. And some of them are so fierce about it. They are passionate about it. And they want to help young singers. I know several of them. They want to help the young singers, and they tell me what they'd like. I had one instance where I had a young singer come in to relieve another singer, and we hadn't discussed fees or anything. So when he got his fee, he looked at it and he said, "Oh, OMG, I can take an Uber." Well, I told several of my donors that, and they were delighted that he could take an Uber.
Right.
So that's what we have to do. We have to continue asking and pushing that envelope so that we can raise the artist's fees.
I just want to say one last thing because we skipped over our whole.
I know, because you asked that question, and then once we get started, yes.
But I just want to add one thing. They
Yes.
have to stop being so frugal. You know what I'm saying? And
do you
remember
mean?
that their ancestors didn't have Ubers and all of that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay, we talking about people that walked from here to Canada.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying.
that's
So-
right. They wanted freedom. But you see, don't you think they did that so that we wouldn't have to?
Right. That's true.
If
But we
we
still do. So.
But if we are the dream of the ancestors, and I say that with a laugh, with a big smile, because sometimes I see what we're doing, and I thought, if we are the dreams of the ancestors, it's a wonder they don't come up and just beat us into their next lifetime.
They probably are. Right.
They probably are, right? But yes, opera artists, I found, as they mature and as they're able to, they do expand. So when that young man said he could take an Uber, we were thrilled. I was thrilled. I thought we did something right. We gave him the right fee, that he feels comfortable enough to go and take an Uber. And that's where we want them. We want them to, I want them to be able to take car service to the airport. I don't want to see them on the train, subway with their bags, and they
No,
should.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I want them to have the mentality of that same Uber money, okay? Let's put it back towards these other ones. Like, you made it to that point. Okay, we got to help these other ones that need to make it to this point. Let's invest some of
Well-
the Uber money back to where we can invest in these ones coming up.
But that's true. But I know that artist had been working on 3 jobs during the time he came in as a fill-in from Opera Exposures. He was shooting a movie, which I'm sure he didn't get paid for, and he was doing something else, which he got some fee for. Artists sometimes don't have another contract to do anything.
Right.
Prior to they do this, and then maybe 2 months later they have that, or maybe a month later they have that. And these are artists at various levels, and they're singing all over the country. So they don't always have another operatic event where they're going to get a fee that can afford an Uber. Now, someone else had said that to me. They said they should have taken the train and saved that Uber money.
I mean, people rode horses. We got so many
However-
different modes of transportation.
We do. But I also feel that you should reward yourself with some level of comfort. I don't want to hear that artists are living off ramen noodles, and there's enough of this pie that everybody can be comfortable. That the portrait of the starving artist has been greatly over-romanticized. Let's put the delete button to it. They may not make what a hedge funder or this, but they should be able to be comfortable within their profession. And we, those of us that are hiring them, should make sure we try to pay them from an ethical budget.
We're going to agree on that right there.
An ethical budget.
We're going to agree there.
Yes.
Because the time has gone.
Oh,
We have to talk about this great woman here.
oh, Marge Garvin.
We definitely, I will not. So we have to start with a happy belated birthday for her because.
Happy belated 84th birthday
Yes.
for Marge Garvin.
Yes.
And she just had a party. She just had a beautiful
Yes.
84th
Have some
birthday.
pictures from her.
We do have pictures. Let's see the pictures. Ah, there's her invitation. That was beautifully done. That's
Yes.
her invitation. And we have some pictures of her,
We have some pictures of her. We have some pictures
of her party,
The atmosphere. Oh,
everything.
here we go. We got
yes,
her.
that's her. That is her and Edwina Martin, who is the public administrator here on Staten Island. And Lady Garvin just looked beautiful.
Both of them. Both of them.
You know what? Edwina Martin always looks outstanding.
Yes.
She is a walking fashion plate. We can spot her anywhere in a crowd.
Yes. Okay.
And that
then-
is Virginia Allen,
Yes.
one of the last surviving Black Angels, and that's Marge Garvin's son,
Right.
Eric's
Senior.
Senior.
Okay.
Yes. And
We see the people in the background.
in the
too.
background, and this is the fabulous Dorian Lake and his band.
Okay.
Compliments came in. He did a jazz set, and I went over to Marja and said, "Are you taking the A train?" And she just sat there and smiled and said, "Yes, I'm on the A train." So, beautiful set, beautiful artist. He's one of a kind. And here's Virginia Allen, and that's my brother Michael Dawson,
Okay.
who
Shout 'em out.
everybody came to Marge's party. Everyone who knew about it
It was
came.
down the block from me.
I
and
know,
I did
I
not know
I
about
know.
it.
And the invitation had gone out. There were so many people that responded, and then there were those people that didn't respond, and they showed up anyway,
Right.
and were most welcome. We're most welcome at the party. And there's again Dorian Lake and his band. Everything
And there
was.
wasn't really no dress code as I'm seeing.
You know, they asked to dress in the 40s
Okay.
style, but everybody was welcome however they were dressed.
Right.
And there she is at the table, at her table, and with the box in front of her where people were able to put their well wishes and their cards of
Okay.
with her.
And she looked so happy.
She was happy. She said that it was everything that she could have wanted.
Right.
And that's all we wanted to hear
And
was
she has given so much, you know what I'm saying? It's just a blessing to be able to give back and make her day because she has made so many people day. She has been just a life changer for so many people, for our neighborhoods, okay?
yes.
And she has earned the name of Miss Park Hill.
She could be the mayor of Staten Island because she gives. She truly embodies service above self.
Yes.
She will feed you right now if you went to her house and said, "Miss Marge, I'm hungry. I haven't had anything to eat in a few days." She will pull out something. She will pull it. And if she's got fish in the refrigerator and needs frying, you're in for a real treat. She will help you with clothes. She has lifted this community up and held it to her heart.
Yeah.
Some years ago, not too many years ago, there were two young brothers that were killed I want to say in Stapleton, two young brothers.
Park Hill Stapleton.
Park Hill and Stapleton, in there, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was in
And these two brothers were killed, and family was planning their funeral, and we kept asking, what are you going to do? What do you need? What do you need for the repast? And we were told that Marge Garvin was handling it. And we said, well, that's so nice, but what do you need?
Right.
What do we need? Because we knew that it was going to, the funeral was going to be well attended, and we knew that it was going to be a large repast. So we kept getting back this answer, you know, Marge Garvin, the mayor of Park Hill. Well, we didn't know.
Right.
And so when we showed up at the church for the funeral, some of the family members went downstairs, and we thought, well, where's the food? And so we made sure that there was paper plates and cups, and we bought soda, and we said, where is the food? And I kept hearing this voice being played back. Well, Marge Garvin said that she would handle the food. And we said, okay, we are going to have to just accept that.
Right.
And when the door opened and the first person came with this large pan of food, once the food started coming, it never stopped. It was everything you can imagine. It was the rice and beans, it was chicken, it was beef, it was macaroni and cheese, it was, and each dish. Now, we were set up to receive food. We had no idea we were going to get this food. But it was all because of Marge Garvin. And I said, I want to meet the woman that could galvanize a community into giving this kind of support. And some years later, when I was retired and I could go and support one of her fish fries, I went, and I went with we were just going to stay and get a plate of food and leave. Well, about 5 hours later, we're sitting at Marge Garvin's dining room table, and I'm talking to Mr. Gums, and we're talking and talking for 5 hours, and we watch everybody come in and buy the fish dinners. And after a while, there were no more sides, so now you're getting fish sandwiches. And Marge Garvin stayed at that stove, and she continued to fry fish. She didn't allow anyone to help her. And I just looked at her, and I thought, this is what you do to raise money for your community, to send children on the Black College Tour, to send children to the chess tournament, to let children go to the golf outing, all of these things to give back to children. I knew that every penny was going to children. And so she told me recently, she said, oh yes, I made a lot of money that day. She said, that was one of my best fish fries. I said, well, you fried fish long enough. And she had desserts, and we bought cake. We kept sitting there just drinking water, buying bottles of water. What else can we buy? And we kept talking and had great conversation. But she never left the stove. And I said, don't you want to sit down? I said, you know, I can stand there and fry the fish. You've already battered it. And she said, no, I don't want to stop. And she kept frying fish. And this is how she supported her community and raised money for our young people.
Right, and her life story is inspiring. I first met her working as a poll inspector. You know, they told me this woman, she marched with Martin Luther King, okay, and for all the years I've worked, rain, sleet, hail, snow,
didn't matter.
She's one of the people who we definitely know is going to walk through that door, cast a vote, and she's going to go out and recruit other people
to come and vote.
To come out there.
To come and vote.
Okay.
Yes.
And she's going to let people know who don't understand the importance of voting, what it means, okay? And this has been going on at least from 1979, from according to Staten Island Advance. You know, they have written plenty of stories on her.
Okay. Just tremendous stories. And one of the things, she talks about her mother.
Right.
She has picked up the mantle that her mother left. Her mother died very young.
Well, reading her story, she was the second youngest, I believe, of 12 kids, and then she raised 12 kids of her own. So
She gave birth to 5, and then she just took in the others,
yes,
and they were her children. And she said that when she was a little girl, her mother, if you came to the door hungry, her mother would give you salt pork and bread with a little vinegar.
all right, that's new to me.
All right, but that's what her mother would
Right.
give to each person that came to the door. And she remembered that her father worked in a place where there were clothes donated and salvaged.
Right.
And she had several dresses. But if she had a friend that didn't have a dress or two, she would give one of hers away. So she has always been giving, and she has a history. And there was a poem written for her. I don't know if we have time for it.
Yes, we sure do.
All right, so it's called Salt Pork and Bread with a Little Vinegar. Let me sing you a sweet good morning. Let me sing you a sweet, sweet good day and an easy night. Had I known then what we know now, I would have rocked you more. In between the loving, praying, working, and working, I would have rocked you more. In between the oxtail, chicken backs, gizzards, and wings, I would have rocked you more. In between the rattling weatherboards and the crackling coal stove, I would have rocked you more. In between the giving some portion of all I had, the salt pork and bread with a little vinegar, I would have rocked you more. Once more, I saw you out the corner of my eye, you taking me in. No sorries needed, baby Ree. That man's madness weren't your fault. We all love some crazy mad thing. God's hand is in that too. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk closer to thee. Yes, God's hand is on that too. It was my hand in God's hand, touching your hand as you held your head. I held your heart as you lost your mind. I rocked your body as you struggled to heal, singing, let me walk closer to thee. When you collapsed, folding in on yourself, trying to find a reason or some small semblance of sense, trying to navigate hell, you found that little bit of vinegar. Yes, 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 because you needed your babies needed, and those yet to come needed, and those, yes, still coming needed. More than lucky to be alive, you carved out of the remains a path, a purpose forged by those death could not shatter or uproot. Baby Ree, I am, we are planted in your DNA. Like the seeds we hid in our braids and cornrows, no matter where they took us or took from us, we grew life. You grew life. And we, Mary Ellen, Barney, Ethel, Herman, Lucille, Nathaniel, Alma, Lee Kelly, Samuel, Ann, Mary Elizabeth, Bobby, Lena, Michael, Kelly, Eric Jr., Anthony, Renee, Miss McKinley are so very proud of you, and we applaud you, and we say thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, God's hand is on this too. This is the story of Marge Garvin's life.
And
So many of the tragedies that happened, she simply turned them into triumphs. Her nickname was Baby Ree.
right.
And as she was shot in the head and assaulted, as her mother said, when you collapsed and lost your mind, I was there, holding you up. And these were all members of her family. Mary Ellen was her mother, and Barney was her father. And as they applaud her, so do we.
Yes.
We applaud her, we support her, we love her, and we need her to know that now.
Yeah.
She is
Very
our
cherished.
icon.
Very cherished. She's just a larger than life. She's almost like a superhero when she steps in the room.
She's so much larger than life, and her story should be told. It should be told documentary. Someone should do her story.
In depth.
In depth. And we touch on mental illness, how you cannot get help for it, even back then.
And she was one of the advocates.
And she was an advocate. She kept going down saying, you know, this person has this gun and he's not well. And the authorities said, well, we can't do anything until he shoots someone. And when he shoots someone, he kills someone.
Right.
And so it goes on. But she is our heroine. She is here. And this salt pork bread with a little vinegar. And what that says is, we always have something to give.
Yes.
We always have something to give. And when we get to a point where we think we have absolutely nothing, then we must find something to give.
Yes.
Even if it's just a compliment, even if it's a kind word to a stranger. We always have something to give. And it is our job to give it. Always. And Marge Garvin, as I said, if you went to her today and said, Miss Marge, I haven't had anything to eat for 2 days. She said, why? And she'd go right to the stove and kitchen and she'd start taking out a pan. She might go to her pantry and take out a few pots. She might say, you got some place to live to heat this up and warm this up. Even at this age,
4 years old.
with all the health issues she has conquered
Yeah.
and she has survived, she would still be the person that would get you a meal, that would give you a few dollars to go to the store and get a little something. She's still giving out salt pork and bread with a little vinegar. And she is an example to all of us
Yes.
that we can do more. And it is our job to stand on the shoulders of the ancestors and do what they would have done and do what they did.
Yes. I'm giving us a wrap up over here. But,
Yeah.
okay, I think we touched where we needed to touch. And if you see her out there, please give her flowers, okay?
We should all be giving her flowers often as we can. Take her a bunch of flowers,
Yes.
and she will be most appreciative.
Yes.
And we should do that. We should do that for all of our elders.
Definitely.
Support them while they're here.
Especially the ones that live by example and show us.
Tremendous example.
Okay.
Tremendous example. She's been an awesome example.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
So we gotta say, love you, Marge Garvin.
Rasta music.